Randall Goosby, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Randall, I think that my listeners are going to want to hear your story in your own words. Please tell us about how things unfolded for you.
I guess it's a sort of funny story. It's not necessarily deeply inspiring or anything like that. I was 6 years old when my mom first I shouldn't say suggested. She stated that I would begin to learn an instrument, as would my two younger siblings. So she said, "Look, you guys have no choice. You're going to learn an instrument, but you do choose what you play." And I chose violin. I don't know why. To this day, I have no idea what the real reason is behind why I chose it. I must have, seen it on TV or maybe heard it on the radio or something. But that was my first response, and it actually took several months for me to actually get a violin in my hands, because when we first wanted to go and buy a violin, we went to a sort of general music store that sells and rents like band instruments and string instruments, and they have piano lessons in the back. So obviously we didn't know what we were doing at that point. And the gentleman at the counter, once he learned we wanted to start violin lessons, he looked at my mom and says, "Your son is kind of on the smaller side. He's very young. He doesn't have very big hands. A lot of times when kids come in at a very young age and they want to learn violin, they quit very soon because they realize how difficult an instrument it is." So we didn't know any better, and he encouraged us to start on piano to get a more sort of basic fundamental understanding. We didn't know that his wife taught piano. So I think that was a little bit of an ulterior motive for him. But I played piano for a few months, and all I remember about taking piano lessons is that no matter how badly I played or how little I practiced, I got candy, Sour Patch Kids. So that kept me in it, kept me in it for a few months. But already after a few short months, my mom says that, I was starting to say things like, "Oh, I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough to do this." Because I think that the double challenge of learning to play with both hands and also read two staffs at once. I was still learning to read music on a very basic level. So I think it was just too much for me. And at the end of the day, it was a blessing in disguise that I didn't start violin immediately.
And sometimes it's the wrong teacher too.
Yeah, that could very well be the case. And I was very fortunate, from the time when I started violin until the time when I stopped taking lessons. Every single teacher I had was amazing in very different ways. So, by the time I started violin, after 3 miserable months of piano, I was really hungry for it. So I was not the kid whose parent sort of forces them to play and they have to be forced to practice. I had my dad telling me, "Hey, son, it's getting late. I've got to wake up in the morning. Do you think you can put it away for the night and start again practicing in the morning?" And my mom would get so upset. She'd say, "How dare you tell him not to practice? You can go to another room and he'll practice. How about that?" So it was always a love at first sight kind of thing for me. And I think I kind of just got lucky.
It's so wonderful that you were exposed to music from an early age. And that's where we see the importance of music education.
Absolutely.
Because I think that even if you don't end up doing a career out of it, learning an instrument is so important. But for some people, being exposed to it shows you that you have a real passion for it. And in your case, also a talent. And I know you've worked really, really, really hard.
Yeah, there's been some hours put in for sure.
Yeah. Randall, I know that you're very involved in the community, and you've spoken about music as a tool for inspiration and social impact. Can you walk us through perhaps a moment where you really felt that true power of music, not just as performance, but as connection and transformation?
There's countless examples. I think one of the earliest examples when I was probably 13, 14 or so, and this was shortly after I won the Sphinx competition. They had their annual competition for Black and Latino string players in Detroit every year. And I entered when I was 13 into the junior division, and I was very fortunate to win the first prize. And as part of the prize, the winners are marketed to and sent out to perform with the partner orchestras of Sphinx, which include New York Phil, Cleveland Orchestra, New World Symphony, legitimate ensembles like this. So that was sort of my first go around with touring and having multiple concerts in a short amount of time. Now, at that point, I was 13 and I was playing, I think, either Meditation from Thais or first movement of Mozart D major for all of these. So it wasn't like I was playing full concerti. But the most nerve-wracking part of any of those trips that I remember was going into schools, playing and performing and sort of interact with kids. And I think part of the reason I was so nervous was because I felt as if I was imposing my love and my passion and my relationship with classical music. I felt like I was sort of imposing that on these kids who weren't interested in it, or so I thought. I was sort of under the impression that there was this preconceived notion from the general public that classical music is like lame, you know what I mean? Nobody wants it's for old people.
Yeah.
And I mean, given what I had experienced playing in audiences and in concert halls, I believed it. I never saw any young people in concert halls in any places where I was performing. So those experiences made me extremely nervous because I was like, okay, well, I either have to play really, really well or they have to think I'm really cool in order for them to get something out of this. And so I didn't think I was going to check either of those boxes. But after every single one of those performances, mind you, when I was 13, I looked like I was maybe 9. I always have looked very young. So when I would go into high schools and play for kids who had like beards and tattoos and stuff, I was like, what could they possibly learn from me? You know, they're already adults. But every time I played one of these performances and I looked out at the audience, there's always kids who are just like, wow, you know, I never knew this was possible. There were many kids who had never seen a violin in person up close before, let alone heard one played at a reasonably high level. And so those experiences in that first year of performing with Sphinx's partners really opened my eyes to the sort of inspirational power of music, right? I don't know what exactly it is. I mean, I know firsthand, I remember being a young kid and watching videos of Oistrakh and Heifetz and Perlman playing, and it really looks like some kind of wizardry. I mean, for a young kid who was just starting violin, I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. So I think for me to think that it's not possible for another kid to have that reaction to seeing someone play, was a little naive, and I think I've learned from that. And now I'm most excited about those kinds of performances and visiting schools and introducing young people to classical music. Because if it's something you've never heard before, you're going to be impressed, you know, and you're going to be inspired to at least check out some recordings, if not try and start the instrument on your own. So that was sort of the first and most impactful example of how music can be used to inspire. You also mentioned the word connection, and I think, you know, that's one of the mystical things about music, is how it can really connect our experiences as people who don't know that we have anything in common necessarily.
Yeah.
I remember after a concert once, I think for an encore, I played Heifetz's arrangement of Estrellita, the Manuel Ponce song, and there was a member of the audience who came to me afterwards, like with tears in their eyes. And that wasn't the surprising part to me, because that piece brings tears to my eyes. You know, I think it's just that kind of music. But this person said, a much older person than me, and they said, you know, I remember when I was, I don't know, something like 6 or 7 years old, and I sat down in my grandfather's living room and he put on an LP of this piece for me. And it took them back to that moment. It was probably 60 plus years ago for them. And for me, I kind of got chills in the moment, because I was like, wow, I don't know you. I didn't know you were in the audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
I could have never imagined that scene in playing the piece myself. But to know that regardless of what I'm feeling and what I feel is coming out of the instrument, music takes every individual person to a completely different place. And I think that's part of the magic of it, especially in the times that we're living in. I'm sure a lot of us want to go to a different place quite often. And so I think music is kind of that bridge into, you know, a friendlier or positive or more loving world, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, I really agree. And I think that that audience member and all of the people that you've played for, they take that with them. And sometimes it, you know, fuels you for several days, sometimes even weeks
Absolutely.
after the event.
Absolutely.
And, you know, as one of my favorite quotes is Maya Angelou, and she says, when you know better, you do better. But also sometimes you don't even know that something exists.
Exactly.
So for you to go in schools and play for young kids, or for them to have the opportunity to see you play, you make them discover something new. I think it's so important.
Yeah. I remember one of the greatest, I guess for lack of a better word, I can't think of a better one right now, but one of the greatest lessons that my mom taught me. And I think it was in response to my being very nervous about those first school visits when I was young. She said, look, there's going to be people who don't like it. But your job is to inspire one person or one kid to either go and ask about starting violin or go and look up a recording of the piece that you played. If you can inspire one person, then you did your job. So that gave me a lot of kind of peace and confidence in terms of just being myself in those situations and not trying to make what I do or make myself seem cooler or different than I was at the moment. So.
Well, yes, you have a very wise mother.
Yes, I do.
And I can confirm that you're both very good and very cool. There you go.
That's
I want to
nice.
talk about repertoire a little bit. You have 2 amazing recordings out on Decca. I highly recommend everyone listen. Actually, 3. Pardon me. because you have the deluxe edition of
Right.
Roots.
2.5.
Yeah, 2.5. And we're downstairs backstage at the Chicago Symphony, and you're going to play the Florence Price Concerto #2 tomorrow. And it looks like you've made a priority to uplift underrepresented voices in classical music. And what you've learned about your own artistry from interpreting and championing the works of these composers, composers like Florence Price, William Grant Still. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? The impact that it had on you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I keep going back to Sphinx. I mean, they played a very big role in my development as a young person and as an artist. And they were my first exposure to Black composers. Until I was 13 and I entered the Sphinx competition, I legitimately thought that composer meant old white man. I didn't know that a Black person could be a composer, because we don't learn about Black composers. We're not taught about that part of musical history.
Or women composers.
Or women composers, exactly. Maybe like Fanny Mendelssohn. at
Yes.
the most, right? But I was so uneducated, for lack of a better word, at that point. So Grant Still was the very first Black composer that I ever came to know. And for me, obviously, as an African American person, it really puts things into a different perspective for me, because suddenly I feel as if I could write music like this. When I was growing up, not that I was necessarily looking for it, but it would have been hard for me to tell you what I had in common with Mozart or Beethoven or Bach, right? These people who I really don't know anything about. I don't know what their experience was like. They lived long enough ago that the world was a completely different place. And with people like Grant Still and Florence Price, Coleridge Taylor Perkinson, even Samuel Coleridge Taylor to some degree, it wasn't that long ago that they were alive. I mean, Grant Still and Florence Price were composing into the 1940s and 50s, right? So it really was not even 100 years ago. And, I think that for me, I was very lucky growing up as a young person, because I don't know exactly whether it was just the fact that I was sort of too young and naive to understand that, like, myself being a Black person playing classical music was different. I didn't feel that way. And watching these documentaries, I'm sure you know about the art of violin. This was like my window into what could have been possible, what was possible for me in the future. I would watch these guys, Milstein and Gitlis and Menuhin, and just completely be entranced. And I never once did it cross my mind like, these guys don't look like me. But I think now, in this day and age, especially where technology has completely taken over, and we are aware of so much more, both immediately around us and also as far away as, across an ocean. I think it's really important for kids to see themselves, right, in the content, in the material, in the experiences that they accumulate as they grow up. For me, I could only imagine how different my experience would have been had I known a great Black violinist who I could have looked up to, who I could have seen myself in on the stage. And I think that's one of the things that very quickly became apparent to me was really important in these school visits. Was most of the time I'm going to Black or Latino communities where funding for the school is not great. Arts programs were either about to be cut or had already been cut. And in many cases, those students came from sort of challenging social backgrounds and circumstances. And so I think for them to see someone who's actually not like an old white guy in a tuxedo playing a violin was really impactful and powerful for them to see, like, wow, actually, we're not that different. And you're doing that. Like, why can't I do that? And I think as far as growing the audience internationally for classical music, that's how we do it. We create an environment where people can see sort of reflections of themselves, whether it's in the musicians on stage, whether it's in the music that they're hearing, or in the background of the composer, for example, in Florence Price. There are so many Black people and Black families who could read Florence Price's biography and listen to her music and latch on to those things that she was trying to say, I think, in her music. And I think as many people as can do that in Mozart, not everyone can. Yeah. So I think from a programming standpoint, broadening the scope of the stories that we tell in classical music is so important. And I've seen already, just in the past few years since these albums have been released, how truly important it is and how much of an impact it makes on especially aspiring musicians. Not even people who are trying to become professional musicians, but people who love music, right? And they want to continue discovering and finding new ways to love music and new things about music to love. And I think if you can find a little piece of your own personal story in a particular piece of music or in a particular composer, that's going to keep you coming back, and it's going to keep your appetite up for continuing to try and find those pathways for connection and inspiration, like we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Eloquently put. I can add
In so many words.
You said something earlier too that I feel like ties in with this, and it's so important, and it's a great transition into a question that I had, and I'm going to make that twofold. At the beginning, you talked about how you learned piano, and at some point you had this thought of, this, I'm just not smart enough for this. And one of the big part of the work that I do with musicians is this importance of mindset, and how sometimes the power of one thought can change everything for you, can change your life. We talked about representation. Seeing something new can change your life because you're exposed to something new. What is a thought that maybe opened up new worlds for you? I mean, you talked about your mother saying you just need to touch one person today, that's enough. Already that is kind of an eye-opening thought. Is there a thought in particular that either had a really sort of, the word dramatic is not what I'm looking for, but this French Canadian is running out of words, so I'll use dramatic, but maybe had a profound is a much better word, profound impact on your life? Or maybe it's a thought that you keep nearby daily to stay strong.
Yeah, I think I could offer a couple of thoughts. I think the first one that comes to mind in terms of having a sort of profound impact on me as an artist specifically is probably from Itzhak Perlman, who was my teacher for quite a number of years at Juilliard. I first met him at his summer music program, the Perlman Music Program, which takes place in the summers on Long Island. And it's a 7-week long program. It's for all string players under the age of 18. And I was 14 when I first went there. And this was my very first lesson with him at the very beginning of the festival. So I was super nervous. I think I was playing like Wieniawski's Second Concerto or something that was kind of technically challenging. And obviously I'd heard all of his recordings hundreds of times. I had so many questions for him about, how do you do this? How do you do that? How does this look so easy for you? And all these other things as far as technique. And he stopped me before he ever answered any of my questions. And he said, let me ask you a question first before I answer any of yours. He said, how does this music make you feel? And I didn't really know I hadn't thought about it. And I think my first response was like, oh, it makes me feel nervous because it's really hard and I'm playing for you. And he said, no, seriously, think about it and then come back and we can talk about some of your questions. Because until you realize and discover for yourself what the message of this music is, what is the story that you're trying to tell, the technique is irrelevant. The music comes first, right? It's not the other way around. And I myself was sort of guilty of subscribing to that sort of ideology where, okay, I'll learn all the notes first and then I'll sprinkle in the music on top, right? Mm-hmm. But ultimately what you're doing is setting yourself up for having to unlearn unmusical playing, right? If you're learning something just to learn the notes and just to get the rhythm right, and with no shape, no color, no phrasing, no personality, that is built into your system after so long. And so once you feel like you have it, you listen back and you say, actually, this is incredibly boring. Now I need to add some stuff to it. But I think in my experience, that's actually quite difficult to have to approach something that you've always only approached as a technical pursuit and suddenly try to make it art and try to tell a story with it. Whereas for him, his point was, from the beginning, when you first open the score for a piece of music, you need to be asking yourself questions. Yeah. Why did he write this? Why did this composer write this? Why did she put this dynamic here and not there? Right? Why did she put it in this octave and not that octave? And I think all of these are decisions that composers ultimately made to tell a story and to communicate something. If it's not a story, it's an emotion or maybe a picture or a scene. But that was probably one of the most impactful ideas that I still carry with me today, especially when I'm teaching. It's something that I have come to accept for myself, and something that, of course, I need reminding about. But anytime I have a chance to teach, or whether it's a master class or a lesson of some kind, this idea drives my whole process. Because I've seen firsthand how instant and dramatic the change is with a student you've never met. When you tell them, listen, for the next 20 minutes, forget about whether you're playing in tune or not. I don't care. I'm not here to help you play in tune, right? You have a teacher for that. Yeah. And even if I wanted to help you play in tune, I couldn't fix it in 20 minutes, right? What I can do is ask you, let's try to figure out what your relationship is to this music. Right? I can ask something simple like, what do you think is one word that describes the feeling of this particular section in the music. And the student will say something. It could be something so simple. Oh, I think this section is heroic. And suddenly they play it again and it's magically in tune.
Right.
Right? And it's so much more engaging and interesting, and you can see and feel that the student has much more fun. Creating something that is removed in a way from the physicality of playing the instrument. It's all up here and it's in here.
Yeah.
And I think when that shift in mentality happens, then I think a lot of doors are unlocked as far as developing more command over the instrument, and also developing a little bit more a sense of trust and a sense of comfort in what you feel about the music. Because ultimately, that's, as a teacher, what I would want my students to get out of our lessons. I'm not going to teach you how to perfectly recreate the same technical sequence every time, right? But I can teach you how to leave the lesson and continue to approach things as if maybe you're your own teacher, and asking yourself, why am I doing this? What in the music tells me that I need to do this? And if there's not something there, then maybe you can shift your approach a little bit. But I think that those words from Mr. Perlman about, the technique serves the music and not the other way around has been extremely valuable over the past, I guess, it's been 15 years since he said that to me. And I'm still talking about it.
And one thing that I love about this, you modeled something so important, and I see that you're doing that as well with your students, is that he brought it back to you before he gave you answers.
Exactly.
He opened the door for you to look inside before he pretended that he had all the answers for you.
Mhm.
And I think that's wonderful, and that is something to be emulated by all.
Absolutely. Hopefully, continuing to move farther and farther away from the days of a teacher saying, "Hey, this is the way to do it."
And this is the fingering.
Right. This is the fingering. This is the way that you should use your bow. You know what I mean? I think music is so incredibly subjective. Not just classical music, but any genre, right? Any instrument. Everyone has their own personal relationship to it. And so I think the best that you can do as a teacher or as a mentor or as a guiding figure in someone's life and work as a musician is to try and just gently push them closer to finding their own
Yeah.
answer, right?
That
Finding their
empowers them on their own journey.
exactly finding their own truth. And I think equipping someone with that degree of responsibility is incredibly productive and powerful. I think for especially for that young person who has now been given permission to make their own
Yeah.
decisions, right?
Yeah.
Instead of waiting until the next lesson and saying, "Hey, how do I do this?"
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's something that I still carry very close to my heart when I'm teaching or when I'm playing.
Another question that I have about mindset for you. You play all over the world with some of the best orchestras, Chicago, New York, and you strike me as being someone who's really centered. What does that look like for you? There's a certain amount of pressure with operating at this high level. What helps you stay grounded?
That's a great question. I think, first of all, a sense of balance in life is very important. So music is not my whole life, right? And it never has been. It's always been my first love. It's been the number one sort of priority and the sort of primary activity that I spend time doing. But I always have something else that I can treat as like an escape, and just completely takes my mind off of music. Whether it's now for me, it's golf. I play a lot of golf. It used to be going to the gym. I used to go to the gym like religiously. Before that, when I was still in high school, my friends would come over and we had a basketball hoop in front of the house. So we'd play for hours, right? And I think all this amazing classical music we get a chance to play is in some way an expression of our experience as human beings. So as musicians who are meant to convey this experience, we have to have experiences outside of playing music, right? Going and hanging out with friends, or going and seeing a movie that you would have never otherwise gone to see. I think a big part of it is, and I'm really not doing so well at this at the moment, is maybe not using my phone as much, not scrolling on social media quite as much, and sort of just that's one way, and I guess you could say, to take your mind off of reality, but it's not an active state of being. I think it's this sort of like autopilot mode where nothing really matters. There's no consequence to anything that you're doing or anything that you're seeing.
It's actually an overload of exposure.
Exactly. It's too much to do anything with. But I think that sense of balance and having almost like a second Passion has always been important for me. My mom was always the one who was very strict about practicing. And I always say that she was a hybrid tiger mom.
I think I had one of those.
Oh, yeah? Because she said, look, practice 3 hours every day. There's nothing you can say or do to get out of it. That is your job
Mhm.
every single day. But after you practice your 3 hours, I really don't care what you do. Go and watch TV, go play outside, you know what I mean? Go across the street to your friend's house, do whatever, do nothing. I don't care,
Mhm.
you know? And especially in the early days of when I was trying to ramp up my practice schedule, my dad was always a little concerned because he was like, listen, he's 10. Why is he doing this for 3 hours a day? His friends are outside knocking for him to come outside. Let him go play. And my mom said, I will. But he has to practice,
When he's
right?
done.
It's just, and she never lost that argument. I think after a while, both my dad and I always felt very comforted by the fact that he was kind of on my side in those moments where I didn't want to practice. But at the end of the day, and especially now looking back, that was the way that it had to be. And I think one other thing that contributes to kind of centeredness or groundedness is this idea, again, that I sort of got from my mom, which is that everything happens for a reason. And it's hard at times to convince yourself of that, especially when things aren't going well. When things aren't going the way you wanted them to go. I've had my fair share of experiences. I go through a sort of cycle every few months where suddenly I feel like I'm not. I almost feel like I don't know how to play the violin. Like I've forgotten how it works and how to sort of get what I want out of the instrument. And those times used to really stress me out. I'm a very, very positive person, extremely optimistic, sometimes maybe even to a fault. But it's always been the case that as happy and as optimistic and positive as I can be, the one thing that can throw me off is if I'm not feeling good on the instrument, if I'm not comfortable. And that used to really, really bother me. I mean, so I don't cry very much. And some of the times when I remember really sort of just like breaking down in tears was because I just felt like I wasn't going anywhere
Mhm.
with the instrument. And obviously in hindsight, that was absolutely not true. I mean, I think as players, it's hard for us to really see, feel, and hear improvement
Yeah.
because we live with ourselves every day, right? That little tiny incremental improvement that happens day after day is invisible, right? It's not until you get a year down the road and you listen back to something and you're like, actually, it wasn't that bad. But I think this mindset applies as much to music as it does for my life in general, which is that I get excited when things aren't going well.
Mhm.
And I've had to like kind of train myself to respond that way because part of the fun in life, for me at least, is coming out of those low moments and getting to a place where you can look down at where you just came from and say, wow, yeah, I figured it out. I did that.
Yeah.
Let's keep going now.
That was one of my questions for you, actually. What keeps the fire going when you feel like
Yeah.
you don't
To, to
quite
me,
feel like it?
to me, it's really exciting. Life would suck if everything was great all the time
Mhm.
because we'd get so bored and we'd lose this sense of appreciation for how great that thing is. If every single performance goes exactly how you want it to, I would imagine that would start to get boring,
Mhm.
right? It's like if I stopped getting nervous for concerts. That would be a little weird to me because it would feel like suddenly I stopped caring, right? I think I take nerves as a very positive thing, which I know is much, much easier said than done. Nerves can be crippling at their worst. But again, this attitude of like, hey, you know what? Even if this doesn't go the way that I want it to go, I'm going to learn something from this, right? And I'm
Mhm.
going to be able to spin it around, maybe not immediately, maybe even not, weeks later, but months or years later, I'll be able to look back at that experience that didn't go well and say, wow, but that's what I learned from that experience. There's always something to take away and something to learn from moments that you feel like you're less than your best. And I think that pervades, every aspect of life. I think you have to appreciate the low moments and the times when you're not feeling your best in order to appreciate the times when you're way up and you're on a high and you're feeling great and everything's going well. Otherwise, we'd lose gratitude for those moments in time. And I think that is ultimately the essence of living a full and enjoyable life, reaching the sort of mountaintop of the day or of the week or the month, and then going back down into the trenches and working hard at something and overcoming an obstacle or a boundary of some kind. That to me is probably what the most fulfilling thing is about playing violin, is we're on this lifelong, never-ending road of discovery, right? And of
Yeah.
learning and of
Yeah.
overcoming challenges and obstacles, right? There are things that I've been trying to find a way around and find a solution for since I was a kid, and things I still haven't really found that for, and it used to really bother me because I was like, well, how can I be a great violinist if I don't have all the tools, every single technique? But at the end of the day, if everybody could do everything, then no one would really be that special, would they?
Yeah.
Everyone has their own unique strengths and weaknesses that together make up who they are, who that unique individual is. And so, yeah, I think embracing tough times is, like I said, it's easier said than done. But I think it puts things into perspective in a way that I think only sort of increases the amount of gratitude that I have for whatever, good or bad.
Beautifully, but I love this answer, and it makes me think also that it's such a great approach for people who are suffering with, I hear it from musicians all the time, debilitating perfectionism. And I feel like this is such a great way to start tackling it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there really is no place for it in classical music or in music of any kind. It's expression, right? It's an artistic manifestation of our experiences as humans. None of that can ever be perfect, right?
Drop your mic right now.
And so, I think that the sooner that we can get over that and get away from this idea that it's not a good performance unless every note is in tune. I mean, Mr. Perlman used to host these Q&A nights for us, the students at his music program over the summer. And I don't remember. Actually, you know what? This was more of a YouTube night. So there were Q&A nights, and there was also YouTube nights where he put together a playlist of his favorite recordings.
Oh, that's awesome.
Favorite artists of all genres. Many of them were singers, which I think had a big effect on how I sort of started to relate to sound, specifically as it relates to violin, right? I just wanted to figure out how to sound like that singer.
Yeah.
That's
such a great idea.
I stopped trying to sound like Heifetz, right? Which is impossible.
Yeah.
And suddenly you start to sound like, you start wanting to sound like Ella Fitzgerald, or you start wanting to sound like, I don't know, Luther Vandross or Pavarotti. Of course, it's unattainable, but eventually you start to want to actually start sounding like your own voice, which I think is the crux of the challenge. But he would always pose this question to us because he would play maybe 3 or 4 different recordings, same piece, different artist, usually singers, different singers. And he would always pose this question to us: would you rather go to a performance and hear someone sing or play perfectly? Not a note is out of place. Not a beat is in the wrong place. There's not everything is perfectly in place, very clean, tidy, but maybe not the most interesting sound, the most compelling voice. Or would you rather hear someone who every now and then there's a note that might stick out, it might be out of place, but they have the most incredible quality of sound or sense of phrasing or timing, rhythm? And for him, the answer was the same every time. I would always rather hear the more interesting player with a couple of little technical difficulties here and there than hear someone who can play anything perfectly without that spark that makes you feel something, that takes you back to your grandfather's living room.
Yeah.
So that for me is what it's about, and I think that's what keeps it fresh for me, performing in so many different places with different orchestras and different repertoire, is time and again having to sort of succumb to the moment and say, okay, what's it going to be today? What am I feeling today? What's the story today? It's funny. I've had a couple of experiences where maybe into the first, second, maybe even into the third movement of a concerto, I haven't really made like a technical mistake. I haven't missed a note, or I haven't played anything out of tune, or no bow whistling. And I'm kind of like, oh, this is really scary. I wish I would just make a mistake now so I can just loosen up, and it's once it's not a perfect performance anymore, in a sense, I feel a bit freer to take risks and let things happen the way that they happen on the day. So, yeah, again, everything that I've said in regards to this sort of mindset thing is easier said than done. But I think it's something that you can sort of train into your system if you really stick to it and convince yourself that these things are true.
Yeah. Hear this? It's important. From Randall to you. Right? In a way, I love what you just said too. It's a training. It doesn't just happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. It was, we just had rehearsal, but people are going to hate me if I don't ask some questions about practicing.
Okay.
So you've worked at the highest level for a long time. How has your definition of productive practice changed over the years?
That's a great question. I think.
Thank you. I liked it.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think most, if not all, young violinists growing up at some point we think that, we have to hit a certain number of hours for it to be a good practice day. I think for me in high school, it was 4 to 5 hours every
Hmm.
day that I was trying to hit. And most of the time I did. And fortunately, this entire time from when I was 14 until when I went to well into college, I had Perlman in my corner, and Catherine Cho was my other primary teacher. Philippe Quint I studied with before them, all fantastic violinists, and they all definitely know how to practice. But I think nowadays I don't always have 4 or 5 hours to practice. And even if I did, maybe I don't want to practice 5 hours on my day off.
We have to do three
I have to do my
because your
3.
mom said so.
Exactly. I've got to stick by mom's rules, even though I'm not under her roof anymore. But I think the productivity of my practice, it's not necessarily like a concrete measurement that I can take, but I think it has a lot to do and correlates with how present I am in whatever it is that I'm playing. I feel like I have to be asking myself questions for me to get something out of a practice session. I never really practice for the sake of repeating something over and over again anymore. I mean, I do just by nature of trying new things with the same passage. But I think there always has to be something that you're after. And this is a dangerous sort of way to put it, because it doesn't mean I want to fix this thing today, or I want to get better at this thing today. It might be, I want to play this phrase differently today, right? A different inflection on this particular note, or maybe a little bit of a different timing here, or, maybe this place is actually green and maybe it's not yellow anymore. These little tiny, like, conceptual things that are very personal, trying to get a little bit closer to your truth in what you want out of the music, right? And I think these things, these sort of lofty questions, ultimately trickle down all the way to things like bowhold or posture. You know what I mean? The process of arriving at these thoughts and then saying, okay, so if I want to do this, I have to do this. If I want to do this, I have to do this. And there's sort of a trickle down effect, which, if you allow it to, it can take you back to the most basic aspects of your playing. And obviously, if this is your thought process and you're working on Beethoven concerto, it's going to take 4 hours, whether you like it or not. So I think it changes very, very often for me. But I think as long as I feel like I've spent, a quality 2-3 hours really present with my instrument and with myself and with the music, and really actively thinking about what it is. Again, I'm going back to Mr. Perlman's quote, which is why. Why am I doing this? Why am I playing this piece? Right? Why is this passage written this way? Why does this passage make me feel this way? And these things ultimately, again, start to spread out into the rest of your technical checklist or whatever the case may be. But I think it's much more. They say it all the time. It's a little bit of an overused phrase, but it's quality, not quantity. If you practice 5 hours and you're watching TV the whole time, you're not really going to remember and really hold on to the things that you worked on, even if they might have been very productive. Let's say you play a passage once, it takes you 30 seconds. And then you spend the next minute and a half thinking, what is it about this place? That's the kind of thing that's going to get you closer to something that someone listening can actually relate to and, find their own experience in. They're not going to find that by hearing a perfect Paganini 5, But I think if you can find a way to make Paganini 5 raise some eyebrows, be like, oh, I didn't know that harmony was there. Oh, I didn't know that little sequence was, and you start to bring out elements of the music that, even if everybody knows it, nobody has necessarily listened to it or heard it or played it in this way, with these kinds of emphases and this kind of a story behind it. So I think that, it's a very vague answer, but I think that's what, for me, makes practice productive, is when questions start to pop up. And I feel like I'm actually able to answer some of them.
I'm with you on the why. I have that word. It's a drawing that my daughter did, and it's framed right above, my.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. That's perfect.
Here's maybe a tough question about performance. So when you step on stage, and I don't know why that would be hard, New York Phil, Chicago Symphony, what is helpful for you to help you anchor yourself in that moment?
Oh, that's a good question. Breathing is a very important one for me. As often as possible, I try to feel as if anytime I begin playing, begin a phrase, begin a note, that I'm exhaling, as if I'm actually singing, right?
Yes, I'm with you on that.
I think that's a big one for me. Breathing is something that we take for granted as string players, because we don't necessarily need to have full total control over our breath the way that wind and brass players do. But not really paying attention to our breath can be equally destructive as it would be for a wind or a brass player. Because, I mean, you probably saw, and those of you watching probably saw when I said, and I actually exhaled, you can see everything move down.
Yeah.
Everything just allows gravity to do its thing. Whereas if I inhale, naturally things start to rise and they start to become held. And imagine if I were to
Yeah.
and hold my breath, and things start to become so uncomfortable so quickly. And I'm one of those players who, especially in softer, more intimate passages, I care so deeply about those places that the last thing I want to do is give it too much. So I often overcompensate, and things start to feel like this, like I'm kind of floating. I'm coming out of the string, and it starts to feel less grounded because I'm fighting against the sort of natural relaxation, the natural forces of gravity. And I think breathing helps a lot with that. And I think the other thing is just enjoying the music that I'm playing. I fell in love with music because it made me feel really special to hear a piece of music and to understand that I was having a very unique and personal experience that no one else could have had. Mm-hmm. And so to take that mindset as a listener and bring it onto the stage and say, okay, this is going to be the only time from now until the end of time that this piece is played this way. Mm-hmm. So let's find out what that is. You know what I mean? I try not to plan so much. I actually try not to play even too much on the concert day because I don't necessarily want to have exhausted, first of all, my energy, but I don't necessarily want to have decided. I don't want to play long enough to say, okay, I'm going to do it that way tonight. Mm-hmm. Because to me, that takes some of the fun out of it, and it actually takes you out of the present. If you know, okay, in 30 bars, I'm going to do this. Whereas if you're almost sort of a passenger and you're experiencing the music both physically and mentally and spiritually as it's happening, I think you open yourself up to so much more opportunity for spontaneity and originality and personality. The last thing that I would want is for something to feel or sound planned because, again, the sort of trajectory, emotionally speaking, of a particular piece is not set in stone. So if we can sort of teach ourselves that in practice so that instead of practicing to play it one way, the same way every time, you practice in a sense to give yourself options. So that let's say you feel like laying into it a little bit more on one day, you have an option for that. Or let's say the next day you want it to be actually a much more intimate moment. You have an option for that. It's not something that takes you out of your comfort zone to do something different than what's on the page or than what you did the last time you played it. So I think that's comforting to me, is just being in the present. And breath is a good one too.
I love it because I'm also an exhaler.
I see.
And like I said, exactly what you said, because we don't technically have to breathe, but actually we do have to breathe. Exhaling, what do you need to do once your lungs are empty? You need to breathe. Mm-hmm. So I feel like not only does it relax our upper body, all of the muscles, the neck, all of this, but also it's an incentive to engage into the breathing activity.
Absolutely.
It's so helpful.
Yeah.
So I'm not your first interview. I'm definitely not your last. Is there a question that maybe was never asked that you would have loved for someone to ask you?
Oh, that's a really good question. I actually can't think of one.
Yeah.
No, I can't think of one. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little bit of a, not necessarily recluse, but like after rehearsal, usually I go back to the hotel room and it's pretty quiet. I might watch some like YouTube videos, or I might catch up on some sports highlights or something like that. But I generally don't find myself thinking like, oh, I wish I could have talked about that today. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Every interview is a little bit different. Many of them ask a lot of the same question, but you haven't, which I very much appreciate. But yeah, generally I'm sort of happy to unpack whatever unfolds in that moment. It's
and you do it so eloquently.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to playing.
Last question before I let you go relax.
Sure.
Like a recluse in your hotel room. Do you have an actionable tip for the listeners? Anything that they could implement maybe in their musical lives or their regular life to find some balance?
Am I talking to violinists?
No, you're talking to all musicians.
I think something that anyone, musician or not, could afford to build into their daily practice, if they haven't already, is actively reminding yourself at least once a day what in your life you're grateful for. I think in a lot of ways it's a really, really, really difficult time in our world and in our country, obviously here in the US, for very, very obvious reasons. And I've had a lot of moments myself where I sort of, I don't know, I have like a zoom out moment and I exit my own sort of personal sphere and I'm like, wow, there are millions and millions and millions of people who would probably give anything to be in the situation that I'm in. And that's not necessarily related to my career or my music or anything. You know, I'm sometimes I'm sitting in a restaurant and eating, you know, and drinking a glass of water. And I'm like, man, somebody could really, really use this right now. And so I think reminding ourselves of the little things in our lives that we might take for granted, we can sit there and say, you know what, I'm really grateful that I have this. Really grateful I have this person in my life. I'm really grateful that I decided to cook breakfast this morning, you know what I mean, instead of go out and buy something or not eat. You know, I think reminding ourselves of the little things that make us happy, the little things that make life a little bit easier can go a long way. I think there's a lot more that could bog us down right now than there is that could lift us up. So we have to be our own lifters. You know, we have to do that for ourselves. And so I think just taking 30 seconds at the beginning of the day and saying, wow, you know, grateful to be alive today, you know, grateful to be able to take a deep breath, grateful to be able to call my mom or my brother, you know, connect with people, or grateful that I don't have to see anyone today. You know, whatever it is for you that, you know, makes you smile a little bit. Remind yourself that that's there and be grateful for it and thankful for it, because it's not guaranteed. And I think that's probably the one actionable tip that I think can apply to everyone. And this also serves as a reminder to myself to continue practicing this sense of gratitude. It's really important, especially again in such hard times that we're in. I think that's part of what I was talking about earlier, of appreciating the highs and the lows, right? No matter how low you go, there's always something to be grateful for. Right? There's always something that is going to stick with you, no matter how high you get or how low you get. And I think that's important to recognize what that thing is or who that person is and keep them close.
Beautifully put. Randall, we can find everything about you at randallgoosby.com.
Yes.
Correct?
And everything that's not there, you can find on my Instagram.
Yeah, so everyone please check it out. Where can people catch you live in the 25-26 season? Where can we see you?
A few different places. I think I start the season in my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee. I'm opening their season for the Memphis Symphony playing Tchaikovsky Concerto. So I've got a few Tchaikovsky, sort of the main piece for the fall, winter. I'm actually going to be in Asia for a couple of weeks, which I'm very excited about. Making my debut with the KBS Symphony. Peter Ungen conducting. Actually, I'm already in the fall, but before then I'll be in London doing my first BBC Proms.
Yes, that's
this summer.
Right. Very exciting.
Yeah, with the Orchestre Nationale de France and Christian Mechelaru conducting. It's going to be the French night at the Proms, so I'm playing a couple of different pieces by French composers, one of which is the G major concerto of Joseph Bologna, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, and the other one is Chanson Poème, which is one of my favorite pieces. I'm sure that most violinists would agree. I'll also be going back to my real hometown, which is where I was born, in San Diego in December, which I'm really excited about. I love going to the West Coast and to the South in December and winter months. Yes, I'm a warm weather guy. But following that in the spring, I'll be doing quite a big tour with the Sphinx Virtuosi. I think it's
probably coming back to Chicago, I'm guessing.
I would hope so. They have two tours. One of them is in the fall and one of them is in the spring. I have the feeling that the spring one is a little bit more West Coast centric, but it could very well be that we're back in Chicago. And I did a special arrangement of the Suite for Violin and Piano by William Grant Still for violin and strings, string orchestra. But actually, violin and strings, and also I did a second version for cello and strings, because in the fall tour, Sterling Elliott is going to play the solo part. So yeah, few exciting dates and tours, and hopefully some of your listeners I'll run into on the road.
Yeah, I'm going to put all these links in the show notes. Of course, your beautiful CDs. Everybody should grab those, and I'm going to have all the links to the social websites in the show notes. I cannot thank you enough for this generosity of time and spirit and insight and wisdom. And I mean, I was already a fan of your playing, but now I'm really a fan of you as an artist, as a person.
Oh,
so thank you so much. Oh, merci.